Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. And if you want to learn more about that, go to our episode that we have done about our proven process and learn about our approach and how we actually create those documented processes and procedures. And I am so happy to introduce today's guest, Ty Givens. Hi, Ty.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Great. Well, Ty, I'm so excited to have you here because it just ties into processes and having good processes, because you are so you're an expert in customer experience, right? And the client experience. You're a visionary in that area. You know, it's like, you know, you're an accomplished trailblazer in the customer experience industry, right? You have so much experience in that. You've been doing it for over 20 years.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk all about customer experience. And we're going to talk about your process of how to deliver the best customer experience. And we're also going to touch about, changing or maybe adjusting or adopting other things that you have to do to make sure that the customer experience is great in times that are not usual, such as the holidays, for instance, right?
Yes.
So, because I really believe that businesses have to prepare ahead of time to different seasons in the business and adapt that customer experience accordingly. So definitely looking forward to this conversation. But tell us a little bit more about you. Anything else you want to add to your bio and who you are?
Yeah, thank you. So I have been in customer experience since I was literally 18 years old. And I started out in Fortune 500
Just 2
companies.
years ago. No, I'm just kidding.
Literally 2 years ago. I usually don't tell my age, but yes, you got it right. And I started out doing phone calls and things like that. And I stumbled upon workforce management as a practice, which is pretty much getting the right people in the right place at the right time. Long story short, going from Fortune 500 and WFM, I started running customer service for startups. And I really loved it because it was raw and nothing is defined, and you get all this opportunity to actually implement change. So I learned quickly that I wasn't someone who wanted to kind of keep things rolling. I actually like to identify the problem, find the solution, implement it, and then hand it back to someone who wants to run it long term. And you can imagine that doesn't really go over so well in your employment history, because after 6 months, you're about done. And they're, wondering why you're moving on so quickly. So I actually started my company 7 years ago. And it's a lot of fun because I get to be that change artist along with my team, and I absolutely love it.
That's great. Wow. Okay, tell us about client experience.
Yeah.
And what are the main points that are important in order to have the correct or the good or the actually excellent client experience?
Yeah, so there's two ways to think about it, right? So we look at businesses through two lenses: startups and scale-ups, right? So the startup is obviously one that's not established yet. We tend to work with funded startups just because they already know that they're going to be a big deal, and they have the funding to actually establish the systems that they need. A scale-up might be a company that started out. It could be, a family business or whatever the case may be. It could be established, but they're hitting their growth, or it's time to modernize and it's time to update, and they have to start making changes. What we find is that in either place, what you need to have is you need to humanize your company. So think about the last time you had to contact any business because something didn't go as you expected. when you reference that, you'll say, I called XYZ business. So for example, I called CX Collective. So CX Collective becomes its own person with its own personality. And everyone who works there is they. It's very rare that anybody remembers that particular person they spoke to. But what they remember is I talked to CX Collective and they finished the sentence. So what you have to do is you have to create a persona around your company. Usually I'll give it a person. Sometimes it's a founder, sometimes it's a co-founder, but you can almost hear their voice through the communication. And when you come up on something that is in that gray area, that's your, what would so-and-so do sort of filter. So we like to have our clients actually personalize who they are and how they want to show up so that we have an idea of who they are and how they want to show up, and then we can build around that.
Wow. Okay. So give me some, like your process on how you do that.
Yeah, a lot of questions. So for example, we'll ask, whose voice are we using when we communicate with the customer, right? And a lot of times, like I actually worked for a company. There were two co-founders. One was just, all business, all operations. The other one was just sunshine. So when it came to developing the customer experience, we used her brand voice. How would she speak to the customer? What would she say? What are her words? What does she use? An example I use is Chick-fil-A. A lot of people recognize that brand. When you go to Chick-fil-A and, you ask for extra sauce and you say thank you, their reply to you is my pleasure, right? That is the brand voice. Is it natural for someone to say my pleasure? Probably not, but it's a requirement as a part of that brand. So my question to my clients are, what are your requirements? What are the words that you always want your customers to hear, or what words do you not want them to hear? Because we need to ingrain that into your frontline so that they're speaking the way that you want them to speak.
Wow, that's great. All right. So let's say, you ask all those questions and you determine those questions, right? Then what? Because, I'm trying to, like, our listeners are listening to us right now and they go, okay, let's say they want to create a great customer experience, right? What process can we give them to follow so they can create that customer experience?
All right. So first is to humanize your brand. The second step is going to be to create your policy. Think of your policies as your guidelines, the things that you publicly tell your customers that are success criteria for them to get along really well with your brand. But in reality, on the inside, you're picking apart all of the things that you say that they should do. So for example, you need to return your items in 30 days. Well, we all know that someone's going to call you on day 32. What do? Someone's going to return something that's clearly worn. What do? So we empower them to have like the basic policies. I'm speaking on e-com right now. Return policy, if there's a warranty, let's document that. What does that mean? Do you do repairs? What's your shipping policy? Questions like that. Do you do exchanges? Just so that it's pretty basic and clear around how you operate. And then the next thing is for each of those scenarios, come up with 3 to 5 things that contradict it and decide how you want to handle that.
Like
and
what?
then you let's say, for the example, the return policy, or let's say an exchange, someone wants to exchange an item, but they haven't returned the original yet. What do?
Well, what do you do? I mean, do you keep to your policy of telling them to return it? Are you just saying it in a nicer way? I mean, what do you really do?
No, you set the expectation. So you tell them that we're happy to process an exchange as soon as we see the tracking for your return, right? And then sometimes you'll need like a return partner. And that's actually in step 4, to be honest with you, which is like the relationships that you build. But you want to make sure that you are giving them the blueprint to be successful, because that's really all that they want. If you have requirements on what what condition it needs to be in when it's returned back to you, outline that for them. Right? If you want it in a specific box, if you want them to include inserts, whatever that is, outline that information for them. And then allow them to be successful. But if they don't do it, already have a plan formulated on what you're going to do if they
Like
don't.
what would be yeah, because you outline obviously in your refund and return policy, right?
Yeah.
And like how many of us really read it? Probably not a lot,
See,
right?
I'm the one that does because I write them. But yes, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean,
100%.
I would if it's like a brand that I never used before, but if it's a
Mhm.
big brand or something that I know, I would probably not. I mean, I'm also not one that, I will see that there are 30 days. I'm not going to try and call on day 32. Believe me, that's just because, I do respect policy, right? But
Yes.
that's that somebody calls on day 32 or they try to return something that is obviously worn. So you have to have a plan basically of telling them, this is the policy, but say it in such a way as you're not making them wrong, but you're including them as part of the group because you want them to come back as a customer, right?
100%. And that's where the brand voice comes in, because it's not always what you say, it's how you say it. So
Mm-hmm.
for example, the example I gave with the co-founders, one of them was Complete Sunshine. The way that she would have handled a situation where someone was outside of policy is she would have apologized for any miscommunication. She would have restated the policy and she would have held firm, right? But she would have done it so nicely that the person would have thanked her for telling them no. Now, you do have the client or the customer who is going to push back. And then that's when you start to get into another set of criteria, which is like customer lifetime value. If this is their very first order, do you really want to make it so that they don't order again? Is it worth it to you? Right? If this is their second order, but they are starting to establish a problem of reporting issues and you're realizing you're giving refunds every time, is that really a customer that you want to keep? Right? So those are the questions that we want our client that we're actually present to our clients so that they can start to answer that. Because what we have to do is empower the front line, because the customer expects that the person who picks up the phone call or replies to the message is a true subject matter expert and for all intents and purposes is all knowing. So when you're hiring new people, you have to make sure that they know what it means to be all knowing. What are their boundaries? Right? And that's when we get into processes, which is step 3. So when you're outlining your processes, you are taking the policies that you've poked holes in and you start to document the what ifs around that. So I love to do workflow diagrams because it forces me to have a yes outcome, a no outcome, and then it helps me to identify anywhere that there's a gray area. And because I know that my job is to create subject matter experts for my clients, I've got to have answers to all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you have something that stands in the gray, that sometimes will be an escalation for the leader, right? Because it might be too broad for you to want someone on the front line to make the decision. But at the same time, you do want the front line to know what is their span of control. And you
Mm-hmm.
can establish that by outlining your workflows.
Absolutely. And I agree with that 100%. I mean, I love processes and we definitely have to have that process. Agreed.
Yeah.
Good. So you establish that process and then what?
Okay, then we're going to move on to finding the tools that are going to work for you. So you notice that I didn't say, let's start off finding the tool and try to make everything fit into that. That is one of the biggest mistakes that we see that happens so often. The client will, get contacted by, maybe, a help desk provider, and they're telling them that, this particular system is going to spew out glitter, unicorns, and rainbows, and you really need all of these things to wow your customers. Well, at the end of the day, you get that thing and you realize you never use the glitter. You actually don't need a unicorn at all, and there are no rainbows necessary. What you really needed was, literally a cupcake. That's all you wanted, was just a cupcake, but you didn't know because they told you about all these grand things. Well, if you start off with a clear understanding of who you are as a brand and what you expect from your customer, and then what you expect from your employee, right? So that's covering humanizing your brand, setting your policy, setting your processes. When you talk to them, you're not going to care too much about the bells and whistles. You're going to care a lot about what it can do to meet your goals. And so, like right now, we have a client who is not a fan of automation, which seems strange to a lot of the vendors that we've been talking to as we've helped them find a help desk, because the first thing the vendor wants to lead with is hire less because you can automate more, introduce a chatbot, do all these things. Well, this brand is clear. They've been working with us. They're clear on who they are. They're clear on their policy. They're clear on their process. And they know that that's not the outcome that they want, right? So we are always an advocate for making sure that you go into those conversations clearly, that you set your requirements. What is it that you need the system to do for you? And that you talk to, we typically try to get to 3 to 5 vendors, and we use a numeric system to determine which ones rise to the top. So there's need to have, nice to have, 0, 5, 10. 0 meaning they don't have it. 5 means they have something that's useful. 10 means they knock it out the park. There is no in between. And then we look at need to have, and we count up the need to have. Those are the 2 that have the highest ranking there. Those are the ones that we're going to be choosing from in a final battle, if you will, on deciding on your tools. Another thing is when you're deciding on the tools and you're deciding on having the system work for you. Early in my career, I made the mistake of thinking I didn't need implementation partners. Implementation partners are gold. You do need an implementation partner. And you also need one who is not going to just do what you ask them, but who's going to take the time to understand what you need and then deliver according to that.
Absolutely.
And that's where we find that we differ a lot. We partner with a lot of like help desk providers. And there's the competition is vast as far as like finding someone who can help you set it up. But what we tend to hear from our clients is that partners want them to come, them being the client, to come ready with expectations. And a lot of times they're like, we don't know what we don't know. What we're looking for is someone to help us. And so because we are CX people who have used and touched these systems in a practical way, we can listen to what they're dealing with and then help them to get the proper setup where they don't have to know anything. All they have to do is just let us do our thing. And then the next thing you know, the systems are working for them and they're starting to see an ROI.
That's beautiful. And I agree with you on the done it for you, because we are all super busy. And that's really what we do for our clients as well. I mean, that's why I started these companies, because I saw that, entrepreneurs will not have the time to document their own processes and procedures. They don't. And I asked them to do it week after week when I was working more of a generalist business advisor, and it just won't work. And I go, wait a second, what if we do it for you? Oh, please, you have to do the done it for you. So what you are doing is so, so valuable, because otherwise, you're right, they're buying all these systems and they have hopes to what it will do, but they just don't have time to implement it. And that's when it becomes a problem.
100%. And I think that the work that you guys do is super important as well, because and it actually is serendipitous, because the next step is the documentation piece in our process, right? A lot of times we run into the scenario where a company will take their top performer. I use air quote fingers, someone who might be producing quickly. And that's the person that they have train the next new hire. And then after a while, you have a couple of people that you have train your next new hire. Well, those new hires are all learning different ways to do the same job, right? Because they're learning from this one person and this is their way. So we're really big on supporting our clients and making sure that you have a unified way and that you have set your expectation for your team. What does it mean to work there? That's question number 1. And that goes a long way for employee retention. I have a silly story. I used to run customer service for See's Candies. And See's Candies, we used to call it a 90-year-old startup, because it was a company with a lot of history, but it was just going through like this reemergence. And there was a lot of new people who were coming in, and I was a part of that new crew. Well, I left there and I went to a startup company right after. So at Seeds Candies, the company culture is huge building. There wasn't any instant messaging or anything like that. If you had a question for someone, you actually got up and you walked over to find that person to ask your question. Someone knocking on your door wasn't uncommon. They used to even fax inter-office. They may still do that. I don't know. This was 2014. So I go to this new startup and I have a question for my boss. He's the CEO. He was in the other room. It was, I don't know, 20 feet away. I get up and I walk over to him. He's sitting at his laptop with his earbuds in. I tap him on the shoulder. He's startled. He turns around. He's like, "What?" And I was like, "Oh, I had a question." He's like, "Why didn't you just chat me?" Because I don't know that that's your company norm. I'm going off of the company norm that I know. So it's little things about like, how do we communicate? What's the expectation around your attendance? And that becomes critical, holiday time as well. But what expectations do we have? What's normal here? Explaining that, because you need to know how to work there. And that's something that I think I consider, because in customer service for a lot of people, it's their very first job. So they're learning how to be adults in the workplace in this role. So you do have to sometimes teach them how to be at work.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you can't assume anything. That's why you have to give them the documentation so they know.
100%.
And that makes things so much easier. So I agree with you 100%.
Yes.
Tai, we were talking mostly in the retail. Some of it was more for retail, like, the exchange, policy and how much can you do, like if you have customer service people answering the phones. But I think it really applies also to a service industry.
Mhm.
Even if you're calling, you're talking about the trades, let's say HVAC contractors,
Mhm.
what does it mean when somebody calls in with a complaint, right? Or what if somebody needs to change their appointment date, but you told them that, they have to have more than 24 hours advance notice, right? So
Yeah.
there are different things that you can translate it. Maybe you're not going to have that much volume as you will have in an e-commerce with people trying to exchange things and ask questions. But I think it's those 5 steps still apply to also the service industry, right?
They do. And in service, what typically happens is you don't have like a return or exchange, but there's a refund policy. So there's a little bit of a trade-off. Like, in what scenarios or situations do you refund, or what are your make good offers? And that goes across the board. Someone's not satisfied, then I will do this thing. If someone doesn't get what they expect, or I will do this thing. Like, what do those look like? So when we talk about the policy and then we go into the workflow, those are differentiators for service. So you're exactly right. They can apply in both places.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the holidays, right? I
Yeah.
mean, how do you see businesses adapt with their customer experience when it picks up during the holiday season?
So for one, they wait too late. That's the first thing. And so typically what we recommend is having strong conversations with your cross-functional partners. So let's say marketing, for example. You're going to want to know from marketing what promotions are they offering, obviously, and you're going to want to know the dates around those promotions. We'll put together like a calendar of sorts, if there isn't one that exists for CX, that gives windows and then proactively provides mea culpa. So, for example, if someone is trying to order and they want to get free shipping, but the free shipping cutoff was yesterday, they order today, they call in and complain, what do? You have a few options. Is this a repeat customer? Yes. Okay. Give them the one-time courtesy. If it's not, okay, give them free shipping on the next order, like things like that. The next thing is to talk to the fulfillment team if you have a physical product. And the reason why you want to do that is you want to understand what they're capable of doing on a daily basis, so that you will understand if you're going to fall short, because you need to know this proactively. So, for example, let's say that fulfillment has a capacity of shipping 1,000 orders a day. right? Well, you just talk to marketing and you ask marketing what are their plans, and marketing's like, hey, we're shooting for 1,500 orders a day. Well, there's already a disconnect there, right? And these teams have, sometimes they communicate and they try to work together, but everybody is going to go after their own targets and goals. And then at the end of the day, CX is right there left to catch it all, right? So if we already know that the number of orders that are going to be placed is greater than the number of orders that can go out, we know that there's a cohort of people who are going to be impacted. So let's look into communicating with those people ahead of time, because it's much better to reach out to 500 people and say, heads up, your order might be delayed one day, versus waiting for 500 people to contact you and say, where's my order? It's little
Absolutely.
things like that, right? And then you also want to talk with product, because you want to understand inventory. So I used to work for a company that had over 4,000 SKUs. But even with that, we had, our top, say, call it 20, that people just loved and bought, and they were always running out. So what we did is we would talk with the head of product so I could understand what's the capacity. How many are we going to have for this time? Or we're going to have, 10,000 units. Okay, great. Is there any way that we can, when we hit 9,000, let's wait list, right? And then instead of saying we're completely out, let's wait list. And then what we'll do is we're going to push those additional 1,000 and wow 1,000 people right away because they got their product. Then we can communicate with the rest. Because I'd rather do that than oversell at 11,000. Now I've got to contact 1,000 people to tell them that they're not going to get what they want. We also want to know what are backups, recommendations for, if you really love product A, but we don't have that one. Let me recommend for you product B, which is just as good or has the same features. So once you do that, you're going to have an idea of like the workload that's coming in as far as like number of orders. A lot of clients, even if they are not doing like traditional forecasting based on history, they might do it based on widgets. So they'll be looking at it saying, for every order, we expect 0.2 contacts. Wonderful. Now we're getting somewhere with a workload forecast, right? So when you have like your workload, you have an understanding about how long it takes. At CX Collective, we actually have a calculator called CX Plan that will take your forecast and handle time and predict your head count for up to 12 months.
Oh, wow.
So you plug that. Yeah, it's so easy to use. I did it because I don't want people to get stuck on spreadsheets, but I wanted them to have value. So you take something like that, you plug it in, now you know what's happening up to 12 months out if you decide to go that far. So now you have your head count. Then the next question is, how many people do I have? How many people do I need? Because you may need to form a partnership or a relationship. That could be with a temp agency, a BPO, or you may just go direct. There are pros and cons to each, right? So let's say you get your folks in the door. Now you're going to be looking at, before you get the people in the door, you want to look at what work can you give them that's quick hitting. Because you and I understand documentation, right? So at the end of the day, we're saying, I'm not going to give a brand new person who's going to be with me for, 8 weeks, product information questions, because I don't expect them to be a SME on the product. But I can give them something around a policy that's pretty much already written, where someone who just has a question and it just is what it is, and they don't want to talk to about it. Fine. You can give them that. And then you start to look at what is that volume? What is that work? And then you put together a short-term training plan. This is what it means to work here during this time. Oh, by the way, it's the holidays and we have a blackout period, which means since we have you on temporarily, we don't expect that you're going to be out Christmas Eve or the day after, New Year's Eve or the day after, Thanksgiving the day before or after. Set that expectation right away, right? And then when they come in the door, they're now learning what it means to work there. They now know the work that they need to perform because you provided them that. And then you're going through your holiday season. Now, as you're working through, you're going to have ups and downs, ebbs and flows. That marketing plan that they gave you, it's going to be directionally sound. People are going to have to pivot because they have goals to reach, remain flexible. But the main thing is that once you get through that holiday rush, call it December 26th, you now need to start focusing on how you're going to avoid a backlog. because that's the next thing. So we have two busy seasons right now and then the top of the year. Right now, because everyone's trying to plan and scramble. Top of the year, because everyone who got through the holidays is now deep, deep, deep in a hole with tickets that they can't get out of because they weren't thinking ahead. So we help them to formulate the plans around being proactive to avoid that backlog, what people may be contacting you about ahead of time, which FAQs to add to your help center, which documentation to provide your team, what they can and cannot do. We work with you to all those things because we believe in the 80-20 rule. We give you 80%, there's going to be 20% that's just going to come up. But if we can give you that 80%, you'll be all right. So the holidays are like, it's one of those things where like come October 1, people will be like, knock, knock. Actually, can you throw together this whole plan that would have normally taken 6 weeks in 4? And sometimes we try to do it.
Understood. But really, the holiday, I mean, having a plan, you have to have the plan ahead of time. And what I'm hearing, and it's so true, you have to have enough foresight. You have to have enough understanding of what will happen and plan, strategically plan, have time to execute, have the systems in place. So when you actually are faced with the holiday season, you want to have the best holiday season ever if you are prepared and not scrambling. And, you know, if it's the first time that you do it, you probably should start in August, honestly, not in October, right?
Yeah.
And even, you know, probably the best time I would think is after you came, like say you didn't have a plan, right? But you came out of the holiday season. Why not start it in February, right? For the next year, because then you have fresh in your mind what happened. You can forecast what will happen, and then you have it there and it's there to stay, and then you revise it every so often.
100%.
Yeah, right. You agree? Yeah, you know, it's kind of like you look at seasonal businesses, and that's the same as the holiday season, right? Because you have seasonal businesses that, you know, maybe it's not the holidays, maybe it's not necessarily the December holidays that are going to be your busy season, but it might be that you're selling something that is, you know, that people buy in the summertime, right? So that summer rush will happen. You have to be prepared for it in the winter, you know, just like ahead of time. Maybe you're selling winter clothes or ski equipment or whatever, and the winter is your highest season, is the busiest season. Then you need to know about that at that time. So you really have to take it in a way that you are prepared ahead of time in order to be successful.
100%. And, you know, one of the other things to think about, and I'm going to go back to my days as a young manager, is that I used to get criticized. I was 24 years old running my first department, and my manager wasn't wrong, but he was saying that I lacked strategic thinking. And what I realized is, how do I strategize to avoid something that I don't even know is coming? Right? And so the point that you're making fits right into that, which is if you're thinking about it, as soon as it happens, it's top of mind. But a lot of times, that February timeframe, let's call it January, February, they're just trying to get out of a backlog. And they're not focused on how do we avoid this in the future. I hope that we can get there, because we actually started talking to our clients about holiday planning in August. So you're right, because we wanted them to think about it. And now in September, we're thinking about how we're going to be like steps that need to be taken to be proactively ready. You know what I'm saying, for this next season that's getting ready to come. For anyone who lacks the ability to think strategically because they haven't seen it yet, which is not an insult. It's just I've been there before. The other thing is, even for those who have been there before, who are just kind of like thinking through, am I capturing everything that I need? Am I doing this right? You know, and there's no such thing as fully right. It's right for you, but like I'm hoping that we can give guidelines.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, Ty, you've been a wealth of information here, and I really want to thank you for sharing it all with us. And I really encourage our listeners to take action and have a plan and prepare for your busy season. Prepare, even if it's, prepare for whatever you need to be prepared with the right policies, with thinking ahead of time, with not reacting, but proactively acting, which will make a huge difference. So Ty, if our listeners want to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
Yes, so we have a website, www.cxcollective.com. We also have a podcast called CXC in the Zone, where we just talk about customer service things. We try to make it funny because customer service is not always that, exciting, but we try to make it funny. And then also I'm on Instagram at It's Ty Givens, and CX Collective is on Instagram at cx.collective.
Wonderful. All right. So I definitely encourage our listeners to contact you and ask questions and visit your website and follow you on Instagram and listen to your podcast. And we'll include all those in our show notes. And thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.